the dust cloud that swirled through Main Street in Laredo, Texas. That scorching afternoon in June of 1877 arrived so suddenly that Teresa Jane barely had time to grab for her bonnet before the wind snatched it right off her head and sent it tumbling through the air like a desperate bird. She gasped and reached out helplessly as the pale blue fabric sailed away from her outstretched fingers, spinning twice before landing with a sickening splat directly in the muddy puddle left by last night's brief but violent thunderstorm. Teresa stood frozen on the wooden boardwalk outside Pritchard's General Store, her blonde hair now completely exposed to the harsh Texas sun, watching her favorite bonnet sink slowly into the brown muck. She had saved for 3 months to buy that bonnet from a traveling merchant who had passed through town, and now it sat ruined in the middle of the street. Her eyes stung with frustrated tears as she gathered her skirts, preparing to retrieve it despite knowing it would likely be beyond saving. Before she could step down from the boardwalk, a tall figure moved past her with surprising speed. A cowboy who had been tying his horse to the hitching post nearby strode directly into the street, his boots squelching in the mud as he bent down and carefully retrieved the sodden bonnet. Teresa watched, mortified and grateful in equal measure, as the stranger examined the damage with a serious expression on his weathered face. He was tall, she noticed, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty work shirt and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, with strong features that suggested both determination and kindness. He could not have been much older than her own 21 years, perhaps 24 or 25 at most, though the responsible set of his jaw made him seem older. The cowboy walked back toward her, still holding the dripping bonnet carefully in both hands as though it were made of delicate crystal rather than mud-soaked fabric. "Madam," he said, his voice a low drawl that held genuine concern, "I believe this belongs to you." "Thank you," Teresa managed to say, reaching for the ruined bonnet, "though I fear it is beyond help now." "Now, I would not be so certain about that," the cowboy replied, and to her surprise he did not hand it over. Instead, he pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and began carefully wiping away the worst of the mud. His movements were gentle and methodical, as though he had all the time in the world and nothing more important to attend to than cleaning a stranger's bonnet. Teresa felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "Sir, you do not have to do that. You have already been more than kind. My mama raised me to finish what I start," he said, glancing up at her with eyes the color of strong coffee. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Besides, a lady should not have to walk around in this sun without proper protection." He continued his careful cleaning, and Teresa found herself studying him more closely. There was something different about this cowboy, something that set him apart from the rough ranch hands and drifters who typically passed through Laredo. His clothes, while dusty from travel, were well maintained, and his hands, though work roughened, moved with unexpected grace. After several minutes of patient work, the cowboy held up the bonnet for inspection. It was still damp and bore faint stains that would likely never fully disappear, but it was recognizably a bonnet again rather than a mud-covered rag. He smiled, apparently satisfied with his efforts. "There now," he said. "Not perfect, but serviceable." Before Teresa could reach for it, he stepped closer, moving up onto the boardwalk beside her. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her head. Teresa felt her breath catch. "I can manage," she said softly, but even as she spoke, she found herself nodding permission. The cowboy's hands were gentle as he settled the damp bonnet on her head, carefully arranging it so that it sat properly despite its bedraggled state. Then, with movements that spoke of practiced familiarity, He took the ribbon ties and brought them together beneath her chin. His fingers brushed against her skin as he formed a neat bow, and Teresa felt electricity shoot through her at the contact. "There," he said quietly, his face close enough that she could see golden flecks in his brown eyes. "Good as new." "Well, nearly." "Thank you," Teresa whispered, finding it suddenly difficult to form words. "I am Teresa Jane, Teresa Jane Johnson." The cowboy stepped back and removed his hat, revealing the full extent of his dark, wavy hair. "Xavier Brennan, madam. Most folks call me Xav. You are not from Laredo, Mr. Brennan." "No, madam. I am down from Colorado looking for work. Heard there might be ranches hiring this way." "There are always ranches hiring," Teresa confirmed, "though the work is hard and the pay often harder to come by." Xavier replaced his hat and glanced down the street toward where several buildings clustered in the heat. "I am not afraid of hard work. Been working cattle since I was big enough to sit a horse." "Then you should speak with Mr. Henderson at the Double H Ranch," Teresa said, surprised at how reluctant she felt to send this stranger away. "It is about 5 miles west of town. They lost several hands last month to a drive up to Kansas and have been short-staffed since." "I appreciate the information, Miss Johnson." Xavier hesitated, then added, "Would it be too forward of me to ask if you might be here in town again soon? I would like to check that your bonnet cleaned up properly once it has had a chance to dry." Teresa felt a smile tug at her lips, despite her best efforts to maintain proper decorum. "I work at the schoolhouse 3 days a week, teaching the younger children. I am usually in town on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays to purchase supplies. Then perhaps I will see you Monday next, Miss Johnson." Xavier touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "If I am fortunate enough to secure that position at the Double H. I hope you do, Mr. Brennan." Teresa watched as Xavier untied his horse, a sturdy roan gelding with intelligent eyes, and swung up into the saddle with easy grace. He touched his hat to her once more before turning the horse westward and riding out of town at an easy lope. She stood on the boardwalk for several minutes after he disappeared from view, one hand touching the damp ribbon beneath her chin. Something had shifted in that brief encounter, something she could not quite name but felt deep in her chest like the first rumble of distant thunder. "Well, well," came a voice from behind her. Teresa turned to find Mrs. Pritchard, the storekeeper's wife, watching her with knowing eyes. "That was quite the gallant rescue." "He was simply being kind," Teresa said, trying to sound casual. "Kind and handsome, Mrs." Pritchard observed with a gentle laugh. "I saw the whole thing from the window. That young man could have simply picked up your bonnet and handed it over, but instead he cleaned it and tied it for you like you were something precious." "You are reading too much into a simple act of courtesy," Teresa protested, but she felt her cheeks warm again. "Perhaps," Mrs. Pritchard allowed, "but I have been married for 32 years, child, and I know the look of a man who has just seen something that caught his interest." "You be careful now. Cowboys are notorious heartbreakers." "I have no intention of having my heart broken," Teresa assured her, though even as she spoke, she wondered if the decision was entirely in her control. She completed her shopping with half her mind elsewhere, gathering the supplies she needed for the schoolhouse and the small cabin she shared with her younger brother Timothy. Their parents had died of fever 3 years earlier, leaving Teresa to raise her 16-year-old brother alone. It had been a struggle, but Teresa's education had secured her the teaching position, and Timothy had found work as an apprentice to the town's blacksmith. They managed barely, but there was little room in their lives for luxuries or frivolous thoughts. And yet, as Teresa walked the mile and a half back to their cabin on the outskirts of town, she found her thoughts returning again and again to Xavier Brennan and his gentle hands tying her bonnet beneath her chin. The following days passed slowly. Teresa taught her students with her usual patience and care, but found herself distracted by the memory of coffee-colored eyes and a small smile. She told herself she was being foolish. Xavier was likely just passing through, and even if he did secure work at the Double H, there was no guarantee she would see him again. Cowboys came and went like tumbleweeds, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. Still, when Monday morning arrived, Teresa took extra care with her appearance. She chose her best day dress, a simple but flattering calico in pale green that brought out the blue of her eyes, and she carefully washed and pressed the blue bonnet that had started everything. The mud stains had faded to barely visible shadows, and the fabric had dried without too much damage. Each time she looked at it, she thought of Xavier's patient cleaning and the gentle touch of his fingers beneath her chin. Timothy noticed her preoccupation over breakfast. "You are acting strange," he observed, spooning porridge into his mouth with the enthusiasm of a growing young man. "Is something wrong at the school?" "Nothing is wrong," Teresa assured him. "I am simply thinking about lesson plans." Timothy gave her a skeptical look but did not press further. He had grown tall and strong in the past year, with their father's dark hair and serious demeanor. Sometimes Teresa looked at him and was startled to realize he was nearly a man. It made her feel both proud and ancient, though she was only 5 years his senior. "I may be late returning today," Timothy said as he prepared to leave for the blacksmith shop. "Mr. Garrett wants me to help with a big order for the Henderson Ranch. Apparently they have been hiring new hands and need various metalwork done." Teresa's heart gave an unexpected leap at the mention of the Henderson Ranch, but she kept her voice casual. "That is fine. I will likely be in town most of the day anyway." The walk into Laredo seemed longer than usual, though Teresa knew it was simply her own anticipation making time move strangely. She arrived at the schoolhouse early and spent the first hour preparing lessons and straightening the small building, all while trying not to constantly look out the window toward Main Street. Her morning class went well, though she had to redirect her attention several times when it wandered. The children, ranging in age from 6 to 12, were sweet but energetic, and keeping them focused on their reading and arithmetic required her full attention. By the time she dismissed them for their lunch break, Teresa felt both exhausted and restless. She walked slowly into town, telling herself she was simply going to have lunch at the small restaurant near the general store, not that she was hoping to encounter anyone in particular. The day was hot again, typical for late June in South Texas, and she was grateful for the shade provided by her bonnet as she made her way down Main Street. "Miss Johnson." The voice came from behind her, and Teresa's heart performed a complicated dance in her chest as she turned to find Xavier Brennan riding toward her on his roan horse. He looked different than he had the previous week, still dusty from work but somehow more settled, as though the past few days had given him roots in the hard Texas soil. Xavier dismounted with practiced ease and walked his horse toward her, a genuine smile lighting his features. "I was hoping I might find you in town today, Mr. Brennan," Teresa said, pleased that her voice sounded steady. "I see you found the Henderson Ranch." "I did, thanks to your directions." "Mr. Henderson hired me on the spot, said he was desperate for hands who actually knew the difference between a cutting horse and a plow horse." Xavier's smile widened. "I have been working the range for the past week, helping move cattle to better grazing. It is good work." "I am glad to hear it." Teresa gestured toward her bonnet. "As you can see, your cleaning efforts were successful. The bonnet dried quite nicely." Xavier's expression grew softer as he studied her. "I am pleased to hear it, though I confess the bonnet looks far better on you than it did sitting in that mud puddle." Teresa felt warmth spread through her chest. You are kind to say so. I am honest to say so, Xavier corrected gently. Miss Johnson, I know this may be forward, but I was wondering if you might allow me to buy you lunch. There is a restaurant just down the street, and I promise to be a perfect gentleman. Teresa knew she should decline. Proper young ladies did not have lunch with cowboys they had only just met, even cowboys who had performed kind services. Mrs. Pritchard's warning about heartbreakers echoed in her mind, and yet, looking into Xavier's earnest face, she found herself wanting to accept more than she had wanted anything in a long time. I would like that, she heard herself say. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Would you please call me Xavier? Or Xave, if you prefer. Mr. Brennan makes me feel like I should be sitting in a church pew. Teresa laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that surprised her. Very well, Xavier, and you may call me Teresa if you wish. Teresa, he repeated, as though testing how her name felt in his mouth. That is a beautiful name. They walked together toward the restaurant, Xavier leading his horse behind them. Teresa was acutely aware of the curious looks they received from townsfolk, but she found she did not care as much as she probably should. There was something about Xavier's presence that made her feel both protected and free, as though his proximity expanded the boundaries of what was possible. The restaurant was a modest establishment run by a Mexican family who served simple but delicious food. Xavier held the door for Teresa, and then saw her seated at a small table near the window before excusing himself to tie his horse outside. When he returned, he removed his hat and sat across from her, his large frame somehow folding gracefully into the small chair. I am afraid I do not have much experience with town dining, Xavier admitted as they waited for someone to take their order. Most of my meals have been cooked over campfires or in ranch bunkhouses. This is hardly fancy town dining, Teresa assured him. But the food is good and the portions generous. An older woman approached their table, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile when she recognized Teresa. Señorita Johnson, how good to see you, and who is your companion? This is Xavier Brennan, Mrs. Martinez. He is new to the area, working for the Henderson Ranch. Mrs. Martinez studied Xavier with the keen eye of someone who had raised 6 children and knew how to assess character quickly. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because her smile widened. Welcome to Laredo, Señor. We have beef stew today, very good, and fresh tortillas. They both ordered the stew, and Mrs. Martinez disappeared into the kitchen, leaving them alone in the quiet restaurant. It was still early for the lunch rush, and they had the place mostly to themselves. Tell me about Colorado, Teresa said, curious to know more about this man who had so quickly captured her attention. What brought you all the way to Texas? Xavier leaned back in his chair, his expression growing distant with memory. I grew up on a small ranch outside of Denver. My parents worked hard to build something, but the winters are brutal up there, and the land can be unforgiving. We lost most of our herd 3 years back in a terrible blizzard, and my father never really recovered from it. He died the following spring, and my mother passed 6 months later. I think she died of a broken heart as much as anything else. I am so sorry, Teresa said softly, recognizing the particular pain of loss. I lost my parents as well. Fever took them both within a week of each other. Xavier's eyes met hers, and in that moment, Teresa felt a connection deeper than mere attraction. Here was someone who understood the weight of unexpected responsibility, the loneliness of being young and suddenly without the anchors that had defined your world. It changes you, does not it? Xavier said quietly, losing them so young. Yes, Teresa agreed. It makes you grow up faster than you should have to. I was 18 when it happened, suddenly responsible for my brother who was only 13. There were days I did not think we would make it. But you did. We did, Teresa confirmed. Though there were moments I was not certain we would. Teaching saved us, I think. The position at the schoolhouse pays enough that we can get by, and Timothy has his apprenticeship now. We manage. Mrs. Martinez returned with steaming bowls of stew and a basket of warm tortillas. The food was as good as promised, rich and flavorful, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Xavier spoke again. After my mother died, I sold what was left of the ranch. Could not bear to stay there with all those memories. I have been working my way south ever since, taking jobs where I can find them, learning different ways of handling cattle. The work up in Colorado is different from what they do here in Texas. Longer drives, different terrain. I like learning new things. Do you plan to stay in Laredo? Teresa asked, trying to sound casual but aware of how much his answer mattered to her. Xavier set down his spoon and looked at her directly. That depends. On what? On whether I find reasons to stay beyond just work. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken meaning. Teresa felt her pulse quicken but forced herself to hold his gaze. And have you found such reasons? I think I might be starting to, Xavier said softly. They finished their meal talking of lighter things, but Teresa felt the weight of possibility hovering over everything they said. Xavier told her about his work at the Double H, describing the vast expanses of Texas rangeland and the challenges of managing cattle in the heat. She told him about her students, sharing funny stories about their antics, and the satisfaction of watching them learn to read. When they finally left the restaurant, Xavier insisting on paying despite Teresa's protests, the sun had moved considerably across the sky. Teresa realized with a start that her afternoon class would be starting soon. I need to get back to the schoolhouse, she said reluctantly. May I walk with you? Xavier asked. They walked slowly up Main Street, leading Xavier's horse between them. People watched, and Teresa knew there would be talk, but she found she did not care. For the first time in 3 years she felt young again, full of possibilities rather than just responsibilities. At the schoolhouse, Xavier helped her up the steps, his hand warm and steady on her elbow. Teresa, he said as she reached for the door, would it be acceptable for me to call on you, properly I mean? I would like to meet your brother and spend time with you if you are willing. Teresa's heart sang even as her practical mind raised warnings. But she had been practical for so long, had been responsible and careful and always thinking of tomorrow rather than today. Surely she deserved this one chance at something more. I would like that very much, she said. We live about 1.5 miles west of town, the small cabin with blue shutters near the creek. You would be welcome to visit on Sunday if you have the day free. I will be there, Xavier promised. He took her hand gently, raising it briefly to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply romantic. Thank you for having lunch with me, Teresa. Thank you for asking me, she replied, her hand tingling where his lips had touched it. She watched him mount his horse and ride away before finally entering the schoolhouse. Her afternoon students were already arriving, and she had to push thoughts of Xavier aside to focus on teaching. But all through the lessons on geography and spelling, she found herself touching the ribbon of her bonnet and remembering gentle hands tying it beneath her chin. That evening, Teresa told Timothy about Xavier over their simple dinner of beans and cornbread. Her brother listened carefully, his young face serious. A cowboy courting you, Timothy said finally. Are you certain that is wise? You know how hard our life has been, Teresa. Can you trust someone who rides from place to place? He is not like that, Teresa said, though she appreciated her brother's protectiveness. He is settling here, building a life, and he has been nothing but respectful. Timothy studied her face and must have seen something there that convinced him, because he sighed and nodded. If he makes you happy, then I am glad. You deserve happiness, Teresa. You have sacrificed so much for me." "Taking care of you was never a sacrifice," Teresa said firmly. "You are my family, Timothy. Everything I did gladly." "Still," Timothy said, "it would be nice to see you smile more. You have not smiled like this in a long time." Sunday arrived both too slowly and too quickly. Teresa cleaned their small cabin until it shone, then changed her dress 3 times before finally settling on a simple blue frock that matched her eyes. She baked biscuits and prepared a pitcher of cool water from the well, feeling nervous in a way she had not felt since her first day teaching school. Timothy had polished his good boots and put on his church shirt without being asked, which touched Teresa more than she could say. He might be protective, but he was also trying to make Xavier feel welcome for her sake. Xavier arrived precisely at noon, riding up to their cabin with wildflowers clutched in one hand. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance as well, wearing clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. "Miss Johnson," he said formally, dismounting and handing her the flowers with a slight bow. "Thank you for inviting me." "Thank you for coming," Teresa replied, accepting the flowers with genuine pleasure. They were simple prairie blooms, nothing fancy, but the fact that he had taken the time to gather them meant everything. "Please, come inside. I would like you to meet my brother." Timothy stood when they entered, and Teresa felt a surge of pride at his polite manners as he shook Xavier's hand. The 2 young men studied each other carefully, and Teresa held her breath, hoping they would like each other. "Your sister speaks highly of you," Xavier said. "She tells me you are apprenticing as a blacksmith." "Yes, sir," Timothy replied. "I have been working with Mr. Garrett for nearly 2 years now. That is skilled work. I have great respect for blacksmiths. A good farrier can make all the difference on a cattle drive." Timothy's posture relaxed slightly at this acknowledgement. "Do you have much experience with drives?" "Some," Xavier said. "I helped move herds up to Cheyenne a few times when I was younger. Hard work but satisfying when you finally get them to market." The 2 began discussing the details of cattle work, and Teresa busied herself arranging the flowers in a jar and setting out the biscuits she had made. She listened to their conversation with half an ear, pleased to hear Timothy's reserve gradually melting away. Xavier had a gift for making people comfortable, she realized, a genuine interest in others that could not be faked. They spent the afternoon sitting outside in the shade of the cottonwood tree that grew beside the cabin. Xavier told them stories of his travels, describing the different landscapes he had seen and the various people he had met along the way. He was a natural storyteller, painting pictures with his words that made even familiar things seem exotic and interesting. In turn, Teresa and Timothy shared their own stories, talking about their parents and the struggles and small triumphs of the past 3 years. Xavier listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and never making them feel pitied despite the hardships they described. As the afternoon wore on, Timothy excused himself to check on some work he needed to finish before Monday, leaving Teresa and Xavier alone beneath the tree. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. "Your brother is a good young man," Xavier observed. "You have done well with him." "He has done well despite me," Teresa corrected. "Timothy has always been strong and capable. He simply needed time to grow into himself. Still, having you to guide him made all the difference." Xavier shifted closer to her on the bench they shared. "You are remarkable, Teresa. I hope you know that." Teresa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I only did what needed to be done. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Xavier said firmly. "Not anyone. Many people would have given up or sent him away to relatives. You kept your family together at an age when most young women are thinking only of dances and beaux. That takes real strength. I suppose I never thought of myself as strong, Teresa admitted. Just stubborn, perhaps. Xavier laughed, a warm sound that made Teresa smile. Stubborn can be a virtue, especially in Texas. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the play of light across the landscape. Then Xavier spoke again, his voice more hesitant. Teresa, I need to be honest with you about something. Teresa felt her stomach clench with sudden worry. What is it? I like you, Xavier said simply. More than I have liked anyone in a very long time. When I saw you that day on the boardwalk, when your bonnet flew into the mud, it felt like fate. I know that probably sounds foolish, but I cannot shake the feeling that I was meant to be in that exact spot at that exact moment. Teresa's heart was pounding so hard she was certain Xavier must be able to hear it. I have been feeling something similar, she confessed. These past few days, I have thought of little else but seeing you again. I want to court you properly, Xavier continued, turning to face her fully. I want to come calling regularly, to get to know you better, to see if this feeling between us is real and lasting. But I need you to understand something first. I am just a cowboy working for wages. I do not have land of my own or much money saved. I cannot offer you an easy life. I have not had an easy life in some time, Teresa said softly. And I have learned that easy and happy are not the same thing. Xavier, I do not care that you are working for wages. What matters to me is the kind of man you are, and everything I have seen tells me you are a good man. Xavier reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with infinite care. Then may I court you, Teresa Jane Johnson? Yes, Teresa whispered. I would be honored. Xavier's smile could have lit the darkening sky. He raised her hand to his lips again, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. You have made me very happy. They sat together as the sunset deepened, talking of dreams and possibilities. Xavier shared his hope of someday having his own small ranch, nothing grand but enough to support a family. Teresa confessed her love of teaching and her hope that she could continue even if circumstances changed. They discovered shared values about family and hard work, about the importance of kindness and keeping your word. When Xavier finally took his leave as full darkness fell, Teresa felt as though she were walking on air. She watched him ride away, his figure gradually disappearing into the night, before turning back to the cabin where Timothy waited. He is a good man, Timothy said without preamble. I was watching from the window. The way he looks at you, Teresa, that is real. I think it is, Teresa agreed, touching her hand where Xavier had kissed it. I truly think it is. The following weeks fell into a pattern that felt both new and comfortable. Xavier came calling every Sunday without fail, and he often found reasons to ride into Laredo on the days when Teresa was teaching. They would share lunch or simply walk together, talking about everything and nothing, building the foundation of something that felt increasingly solid. The town noticed, of course. Mrs. Pritchard stopped being subtle about her approval, often commenting loudly about what a fine couple they made. Even the children at school asked Teresa about her cowboy, their innocent questions making her blush and smile simultaneously. Xavier proved to be patient and respectful in his courtship, never pushing for more than Teresa was ready to give. But Teresa felt herself falling deeper with each passing day. She loved the way he listened when she spoke, really listened as though her words were important. She loved his quiet competence and the gentle way he treated his horse and every other living creature. She loved his ambition tempered with realism, his dreams balanced by practical hard work. 2 months after they met, Xavier invited Teresa to visit the Double H Ranch to see where he worked. She rode beside him on a gentle mare he had borrowed from Mr. Henderson, thrilling at the vast openness of the Texas landscape. The ranch was impressive, sprawling across thousands of acres, and Xavier introduced her to the other hands with obvious pride. "So this is the famous Teresa," said one older cowboy with a knowing grin. "Xavier has not stopped talking about you since the day he arrived." "Jackson, you are embarrassing me," Xavier protested, but Teresa could see he was pleased. They rode out to where the cattle grazed, and Xavier showed Teresa the work he did, explaining the intricacies of managing large herds in the Texas heat. He was clearly good at his job, respected by the other hands and trusted by Mr. Henderson. Watching him work, confident and capable, Teresa felt a surge of affection so strong it almost frightened her. On the ride back to town, they stopped to rest the horses near a small creek that wound through the countryside. They sat on the bank, their feet dangling near the water, and Xavier took Teresa's hand in his. "Teresa, these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life," he said seriously. "I know we have not known each other long, but I am certain of my feelings. I love you." Teresa's breath caught. The words hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. She turned to face him fully, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope and fear mixed together. "I love you too," she said, and the truth of it rang through her entire being. "I think I have loved you since you cleaned my bonnet and tied it so gently beneath my chin." Xavier's face transformed with joy. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Teresa breathed. His lips met hers softly at first, a gentle question that she answered by leaning into him. The kiss deepened, and Teresa felt the world narrow to just this moment, this man, this perfect joining of two hearts that had found each other against all odds. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Teresa. I know I do not have much to offer yet, but I swear I will spend every day working to give you the life you deserve. I will take care of you and Timothy. I will build us a home and a future. Just say yes." Teresa's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying simultaneously. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you." Xavier whooped with delight and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, this time with less restraint, and Teresa felt desire kindle within her, a heat that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "When?" Xavier asked when they finally broke apart again. "I do not want to wait long if you do not." "Neither do I," Teresa admitted. "But we must be practical. We need time to prepare, to find somewhere to live." "I have been thinking about that," Xavier said eagerly. "Mr. Henderson mentioned that there is a small house on the ranch property that has been standing empty. It was built for a foreman years ago but has not been used in some time. He said if I wanted to fix it up, we could live there. The work is solid, just needs some repairs and cleaning." "That sounds wonderful," Teresa said. "And Timothy would be welcome too, of course. There is plenty of room, and he could continue his apprenticeship in town. Or, if he wanted, Mr. Henderson might have work for him at the ranch. We could use someone with blacksmith skills." Teresa felt overwhelmed by how quickly everything was falling into place. Just 3 months ago, she had been resigned to a life of solitary responsibility, never imagining that love might find her. And now here she was, engaged to a good man who wanted to build a life with her. They returned to town as the sun was setting, and together they told Timothy the news. Her brother's face split into a genuine smile, and he shook Xavier's hand with real warmth. "Welcome to the family," Timothy said. "Though I suppose I should warn you that Teresa can be stubborn as a mule when she sets her mind to something." "I already noticed," Xavier said with a laugh. dodging the playful swat Teresa aimed at his arm. "I consider it one of her finest qualities." They decided to marry in September, giving them 2 months to prepare and allowing the worst of the summer heat to pass. Teresa wanted a simple ceremony, just close friends and family in the small church that served Laredo. Xavier agreed readily, saying he only cared about the marriage itself, not the wedding. The next 2 months passed in a blur of activity. Xavier spent his free time working on the foreman's house, and Timothy often joined him on Sundays to help with repairs. Teresa sewed a wedding dress from fabric she bought with her carefully saved wages, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored cotton. She gave notice at the school that she would be leaving her position, though the decision pained her. Teaching had been her salvation, but she knew it would be impossible to continue once she was married and living at the ranch. The school board found a replacement easily enough, a young woman from San Antonio looking for work, and Teresa spent time training her successor while fighting waves of bittersweet emotion. Mrs. Pritchard insisted on hosting a small party for Teresa and Xavier, inviting half the town to celebrate their engagement. It was a lovely evening filled with good food and genuine warmth, and Teresa felt grateful for the community that had supported her through the difficult years. As September approached, Xavier showed Teresa the finished house. He had worked miracles with the rundown structure, repairing the roof, replacing broken windows, and cleaning every surface until it shone. The house was small but cozy, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space, a separate bedroom, and a loft where Timothy could sleep. Xavier had even built furniture, simple pieces that showed both skill and care. "It is not much," Xavier said, watching Teresa explore their future home. "But it is solid and weatherproof, and we can add to it as we go." "It is perfect," Teresa said honestly, running her hand along the smooth surface of the table Xavier had built. "I love it, Xavier. It feels like a real home." The wedding day arrived with clear blue skies and temperatures that were almost pleasant for South Texas in September. Teresa dressed in her new gown with shaking hands, helped by Mrs. Pritchard and several other women who had become friends over the years. When she looked at herself in the borrowed mirror, she barely recognized the nervous, frightened girl who had stood in almost this same spot 3 years earlier at her parents' funeral. That girl had been crushed by responsibility and fear. The woman looking back at her now was still young, still facing uncertainty, but she was no longer alone. Timothy escorted her to the church, looking handsome and grown up in his good suit. "Papa would be proud," he whispered as they walked. "You chose well, Teresa." The ceremony itself passed in a haze of emotion. Teresa saw Xavier waiting at the altar, looking more serious and handsome than she had ever seen him, and her heart swelled with love. The preacher's words washed over her, familiar and comforting, until they reached the vows. "Do you, Xavier Benjamin Brennan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Xavier said firmly, his eyes never leaving Teresa's face. "And do you, Teresa Jane Johnson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Teresa said, her voice strong and clear. When the preacher pronounced them married and Xavier kissed her, Teresa felt as though her life was truly beginning. All the struggles and sorrows that had come before were not erased, but they were transformed, becoming the foundation upon which this new life would be built. The celebration afterward was joyful but brief, as was proper for a simple cowboy's wedding. By late afternoon, Xavier and Teresa were riding together toward the Double H Ranch, toward their little house and their new life together. Timothy had chosen to stay in town for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy, and Teresa felt both grateful and nervous about the evening ahead. Xavier seemed to sense her nerves because he kept up a steady stream of gentle conversation as they rode, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the ranch. By the time they reached their house, Teresa felt calmer, more centered in the rightness of this choice. Inside, Xavier had laid a fire in the hearth despite the warm evening, and he had set the table with bread, cheese, and wine borrowed from Mr. Henderson's private stock. It was simple but thoughtful, and Teresa felt tears prick her eyes at his consideration. "I want tonight to be special," Xavier said softly, helping her out of her bonnet. It was the same blue bonnet he had cleaned and tied beneath her chin, and Teresa had insisted on wearing it for the wedding. "I want everything to be perfect for you, Teresa." "It already is," Teresa assured him. "Being with you is all I need." They ate slowly, talking and laughing, the nervousness gradually giving way to anticipation. When Xavier finally stood and offered her his hand, Teresa took it without hesitation. That night, Teresa discovered that physical love could be both tender and passionate, that joining with someone you truly loved transformed the act into something almost sacred. Xavier was patient and careful with her, and when they finally came together completely, Teresa felt as though they had truly become one person, bound by something deeper than law or custom. Afterward, lying in Xavier's arms in the darkness, listening to his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, Teresa felt a peace she had not known since before her parents died. She was home, truly home, in a way that had nothing to do with buildings or locations and everything to do with the man holding her. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Xavier replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Forever, Teresa. I promise you forever." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Life on a ranch was demanding, and Teresa had to learn new skills and adapt to new routines. She missed teaching sometimes, missed the satisfaction of watching young minds open to knowledge, but she found new satisfactions in building a home with Xavier. Timothy moved to the ranch with them, taking a position as Mr. Henderson's assistant blacksmith. The ranch had enough work to keep a smithy busy full-time, and Timothy flourished under the increased responsibility. He had his own small cabin now, separate from Xavier and Teresa, which gave all of them the space they needed while keeping the family close. Teresa threw herself into learning ranch life. She became skilled at managing the household, at cooking large meals for the ranch hands, at tending the vegetable garden she planted behind their house. She learned to ride better, venturing out with Xavier sometimes when he was working closer pastures. She even learned basic veterinary skills, helping with difficult births and treating injured animals. But the greatest joy came in the spring following their wedding when Teresa realized she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening as they sat together watching the sunset, the way they often did after a long day's work. "Xavier," she said softly, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, "we are going to have a baby." Xavier's face went through a remarkable transformation, from confusion to understanding to pure joy in the span of seconds. "Truly, we are going to be parents. In about 6 months, if my calculations are correct." Xavier pulled her close, holding her as though she were made of precious glass. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "Teresa, you have made me the happiest man in Texas." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Teresa bloomed under Xavier's careful attention. He treated her like she was something miraculous, constantly asking if she needed anything, worrying about her health. It was both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but Teresa loved him all the more for his concern. On a cool October evening in 1878, with Mrs. Pritchard and the doctor in attendance, Teresa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Jacob William, after both their fathers, and from the moment Teresa held him, she felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Xavier cried when he first held his son, tears streaming down his weathered face as he cradled the tiny bundle. "He is perfect," Xavier said in wonder. "Teresa, we made something perfect." Jacob proved to be a good baby, healthy and happy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Timothy doted on his nephew, carving toys and teaching him to smile. The little house rang with laughter and life in ways Teresa had once thought impossible. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family. Emma Rose was born during a spring thunderstorm, arriving quickly and with apparent eagerness to join the world. She had Xavier's brown eyes and a temperament that suggested she would be as stubborn as her mother, a fact that made everyone laugh. Life settled into rhythms that felt both comfortable and exciting. Xavier continued to work hard for the Henderson Ranch, but his dedication and skill had not gone unnoticed. Mr. Henderson promoted him to assistant foreman, then foreman, giving him more responsibility and better wages. Xavier began saving seriously, still dreaming of the day he might have land of his own. Teresa found ways to continue teaching, gathering the ranch children once a week for informal lessons. It satisfied her need to educate while allowing her to focus primarily on her own growing family. She taught Jacob his letters and numbers, delighting in his quick mind and curious nature. The years flowed past, marked by small triumphs and occasional setbacks, by hot summers and mild winters, by the daily work of building a life together. Timothy eventually married a sweet girl from town, a blacksmith's daughter named Sarah, and they had children of their own. The family dinners at the ranch became large, noisy affairs filled with cousins and laughter. When Jacob was 7 and Emma 5, Xavier came home one evening with news that made Teresa's heart leap. "Mr. Henderson wants to sell me a parcel of land," he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. 500 acres on the northern edge of his property. "He said I have been a good foreman and a good man, and he wants to help me get started on my own. The price is fair, Teresa. With what we have saved, we can afford it." "Your own land," Teresa breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "Oh, Xavier, that is wonderful. Our own land," Xavier corrected. "Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to you, Teresa. This ranch will be ours together, built by both of us." They purchased the land and spent the next 2 years building their own ranch house while still living in the foreman's cottage. It was a larger house this time, with enough room for their growing family and space for the future. Xavier and Timothy did most of the construction themselves, with help from other ranch hands on Sundays. Slowly, board by board, their dream took shape. When they finally moved into their own house on their own land, Teresa stood on the front porch and looked out at the vast expanse that now belonged to them. She thought about that day 8 years earlier when her bonnet had blown into the mud, when a stranger with kind eyes had cleaned it and tied it gently beneath her chin. That moment had changed everything, had opened a door to a life she had not dared imagine. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "About how we started," Teresa said, leaning back against him. "About mud and kindness and unexpected fate." "Best bonnet that ever flew into a mud puddle," Xavier said with a laugh. "I still have it, you know. Tucked away in a trunk. I thought maybe someday we could give it to Emma, tell her the story of how her parents met." "I would like that," Teresa said softly. Their ranch, which they named the Brennan Spread, prospered over the following years. It was never as large as the Henderson Ranch, but it was theirs, built through hard work and determination. They ran cattle and horses, and Teresa kept chickens and maintained a large garden that supplied both their table and provided extra to sell in town. Jacob grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch life as much as his father did. Emma was more spirited, constantly asking questions and wanting to learn everything. When a new teacher came to Laredo and struggled to manage the larger classes, Teresa offered to help part-time, finally returning to the teaching she loved while still managing her home and family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Teresa by taking her back to that spot in Laredo where they had first met. Main Street had changed somewhat, new buildings rising where old ones had stood, but the boardwalk outside Pritchard's General Store remained the same. "Right there," Xavier said, pointing to the wooden planks. "That is where you were standing when your bonnet blew away." "And you were there," Teresa said, pointing to the hitching post, "tying your horse and probably thinking about nothing more important than finding work and a good meal. And then I looked up and saw the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, reaching desperately for her runaway bonnet." Xavier pulled her close. "I knew in that moment, Teresa. I did not understand it then, but I know now. I knew you were going to change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Teresa corrected. "I was so lost before you, Xavier, going through the motions of living but not really alive. You gave me back joy and hope and a future to look forward to." "We gave that to each other," Xavier said, then smiled. "Should we recreate it? I could go stand over there, you could pretend your bonnet flew off." Teresa laughed, the sound bright and free. "I think once was enough for that particular adventure. Besides, I tie my bonnets much more securely now." They had dinner at the same restaurant where they had shared their first meal, now run by Mrs. Martinez's daughter, but still serving the same delicious food. They talked about their children, their ranch, their dreams for the future. After 10 years, they still had things to say to each other, still found joy in each other's company. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked as they walked back to where their wagon waited. "Marrying a cowboy, taking on ranch life. You could have had an easier path, Teresa." "Never," Teresa said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I ever wanted, even things I did not know I wanted. A home, a family, love, purpose. How could I ever regret that?" "I had to ask," Xavier admitted. "Sometimes I still cannot believe my good fortune. That you chose me, that you have stayed with me through everything." "It was never a hard choice," Teresa assured him. "From the moment you cleaned my bonnet with such care, I knew you were different, special. Mine." More years passed, bringing more changes. Jacob married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they built a small house on the Brennan land. Emma shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher like her mother, and she went to San Antonio for training, returning to eventually take over Teresa's position at the Laredo school. Timothy's children grew and started families of their own. Mr. Henderson retired and sold the Double H to a large cattle company from the East, but they retained Xavier as foreman out of respect for his years of service and knowledge of the land. Xavier continued to work there part-time while managing his own ranch, teaching Jacob everything he knew about cattle and horses and the land itself. On Teresa's 40th birthday, Xavier organized a surprise party that brought together everyone they cared about. The house was filled with family and friends, with children running underfoot and laughter echoing off the walls. Teresa stood in the center of it all, feeling overwhelmed by gratitude for the life she had been given. That night, after everyone had left and they were alone in the quiet house, Xavier presented her with a carefully wrapped package. Inside was the blue bonnet, cleaned and restored, the mud stains now completely invisible. "I had it properly cleaned and repaired," Xavier explained. "I wanted you to have it again, to remember where we started." Teresa held the bonnet carefully, tears streaming down her face. "I do not need a bonnet to remember," she said softly. "I think of that day constantly. How scared I was that it was ruined. How amazed I was when you took such care with it. How gentle your hands were when you tied it beneath my chin. Those were the first moments I touched you," Xavier said quietly. "I remember thinking your skin was soft as silk, and that I wanted more than anything to have the right to touch you like that whenever I wished." "And now you do," Teresa said, setting the bonnet aside and moving into his arms. "For the rest of our lives, Xavier, for whatever time we are given." The years continued their steady march. Jacob and his wife gave them grandchildren, 3 boys who were as wild and wonderful as prairie wind. Emma married one of her fellow teachers, a quiet man from Houston who adored her, and they had twin daughters who showed signs of inheriting their mother's spirited nature. Teresa and Xavier grew older together, their hair silvering and their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and long years. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew deeper and more precious with each passing year, tempered by shared experiences and strengthened by mutual respect. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the Brennan spread for a celebration. The house and barns were decorated with ribbons, and tables were laden with food prepared by multiple generations. Children played in the yard while adults talked and laughed, and Teresa looked around at everything they had built, not just in terms of property and structures, but in terms of family and love. Xavier found her standing on the porch, watching the festivities with shining eyes. "Are you happy?" he asked, taking her hand. "Deliriously," Teresa confirmed. "Look at all of this, Xavier. Look at what came from one muddy bonnet and a kind cowboy." "Best decision I ever made climbing down into that mud," Xavier said with a grin, "though my boots were never quite the same afterward." Teresa laughed and pulled him close. "I love you, Xavier Brennan. I have loved you for 25 years, and I will love you for 25 more if we are blessed with that much time. And I love you, Teresa Jane Brennan. You have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest adventure. Everything good in my life traces back to you." They stood together on the porch, watching their family, listening to the sounds of joy and life. The Texas sun blazed overhead, the same sun that had witnessed their first meeting all those years ago. The land stretched out around them, familiar and beloved, the ranch they had built together through determination and love. As the celebration continued into the evening, Teresa thought about the journey that had brought them here. There had been hard times, certainly. Droughts that threatened their herds, illnesses that scared them, financial worries that kept them awake at night. But through it all, they had faced everything together, never doubting their commitment to each other or the life they were building. The blue bonnet hung now in a place of honor in their bedroom, a reminder of beginnings and the unexpected ways that fate could work. Sometimes Teresa would take it down and hold it, remembering that hot June day when her world had changed in the time it took for wind to snatch fabric from her head. She had been so worried about that bonnet, she remembered. It had represented a rare luxury, a small indulgence she had saved for. Losing it to the mud had felt like losing something precious, but what she had gained in exchange made the bonnet seem insignificant. Xavier had given her everything that truly mattered, all starting from a simple act of kindness toward a stranger. Years continued to pass, bringing inevitable changes. Mr. Henderson died at a ripe old age, surrounded by family, and his funeral brought together the entire ranching community. Timothy's hair went completely white, though he was still strong and capable at his forge. Sarah became a grandmother many times over, presiding over family gatherings with warm humor. Teresa and Xavier settled into a comfortable rhythm of days spent working together on the ranch, evenings on the porch watching sunsets, nights in each other's arms. Their bodies might have aged, but their love remained vibrant and alive. They still talked for hours, still found joy in simple moments together, still reached for each other in the darkness. When Teresa turned 50, she finally stopped teaching at the school, wanting to spend more time helping with grandchildren and managing the ranch. Emma had taken over completely anyway, proving to be an even better teacher than her mother, with innovative ideas about education that Teresa admired. Jacob had become a skilled rancher in his own right, managing most of the day-to-day operations of the Brennan spread, while Xavier took on more of an advisory role. It was satisfying to watch their son step into leadership, to see him make decisions with the same careful consideration Xavier had always shown. The grandchildren brought endless delight. They would visit the ranch and listen with wide eyes as Xavier told them stories of the old days, of cattle drives and wild horses, of building something from nothing. Teresa would teach them to read and cook, passing on skills and knowledge to the next generation. One particular grandson, Jacob's middle son Peter, showed a special interest in the story of how his grandparents met. He would ask Teresa to tell it again and again, never tiring of the details about the muddy Bonnet and the kind Cowboy. "Did you know right away that you loved him?" Peter asked one day when he was about 8 years old. Teresa considered the question carefully. "I knew there was something special about him right away," she said honestly. "But love takes time to grow, Peter. It starts with attraction and interest, but real love is built over months and years of choosing each other every single day." "But you did love him. From the beginning." "I loved who I sensed he could be," Teresa said. "And then I got to know him, and I loved who he actually was even more than I imagined. That is the best kind of love, when someone is even better than you hoped." Peter seemed satisfied with this answer and ran off to play, but the conversation stayed with Teresa. It was true, she reflected. Xavier had exceeded her hopes in every way. He had proven to be not just kind but deeply good, not just hardworking but innovative, not just a good husband but a wonderful father and now grandfather. On their 30th anniversary, Xavier surprised Teresa by taking her on a trip. They traveled by train to San Antonio, staying in a real hotel for the first time in their lives. It felt impossibly luxurious after years of ranch living, and they enjoyed exploring the city together like young sweethearts. One evening, as they walked along the river that wound through San Antonio, Xavier stopped and turned to face her. "Teresa, I want to thank you." "For what?" "For saying yes when I asked you to marry me, for building this life with me, for giving me children and grandchildren, for being my partner in everything. I know I do not say it enough, but you are the reason for everything good in my life." Teresa felt tears prick her eyes. "You are the reason for everything good in mine, Xavier. Before you, I was just surviving. You taught me how to truly live." They kissed there beside the river, two middle-aged people still deeply in love after 3 decades together. Some passers-by smiled at them, and Teresa felt a surge of joy. They had made it, she and Xavier. They had beaten the odds and built something lasting. The trip became a tradition, an annual journey to somewhere new to celebrate their anniversary. They visited Austin and Houston, Dallas and Galveston. Each trip was an adventure, a chance to be alone together without the demands of ranch life. But they were always eager to return home, to the land and family they loved. Time moved inexorably forward. More grandchildren arrived and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under Jacob's management, and he began buying additional land, expanding what his parents had started. Emma became a respected educator, training new teachers and developing curriculum for schools throughout South Texas. Teresa and Xavier moved into a smaller house on the property, leaving the main ranch house to Jacob and his growing family. It felt right, this passing of responsibility to the next generation, though they remained active and involved in ranch life. On their 40th anniversary, the family organized a massive celebration. People came from all over Texas, old friends and distant relatives, all gathering to honor the couple who had built such a remarkable legacy. There were speeches and toasts, and Xavier stood before the assembled crowd with Teresa at his side. 40 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his 66 years, a woman's bonnet blew into the mud on Main Street in Laredo. I happened to be in the right place at the right time to retrieve it. That simple act changed my entire life, gave me everything I hold dear. So I want to raise a glass to that bonnet, to unexpected moments, and to the woman who has been my companion through 4 decades of joy and struggle. To Teresa, my heart and my home. To Teresa, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Teresa stood, tears flowing freely down her lined face. And to Xavier, she said, her voice wavering with emotion, who saw a stranger in distress and chose kindness, who cleaned a muddy bonnet with such care that I knew immediately what kind of man he was, who has spent 40 years proving every single day that my faith in him was well placed. I love you, Xavier Brennan, more today than I did 40 years ago, and that is saying something because I loved you quite a lot even then. The party continued late into the night, filled with music and dancing and laughter. Teresa and Xavier danced together under the stars, their movements slower than they once were but no less meaningful. They had danced together at their wedding, at countless parties and celebrations over the years, and each dance was precious. As they swayed together, Teresa rested her head on Xavier's shoulder and thought about the journey they had shared. From that moment on Main Street, when he had tied her bonnet beneath her chin with such gentle care, through courtship and marriage, through the births of children and grandchildren, through drought and prosperity, through youth and middle age, and now into their elder years, they had been together. No regrets, Xavier murmured into her hair. Not a single one, Teresa confirmed. You, Xavier Brennan, have given me the most wonderful life imaginable. We gave it to each other, Xavier corrected, as he always did. Everything we have, we built together. The years after their 40th anniversary were quieter, but no less rich. They spent their days in gentle routine, helping with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, offering advice when asked, enjoying the simple pleasures of a life well lived. Their health remained good, a blessing they never took for granted. Teresa continued to keep a garden, though it was smaller now, and Xavier still rode the property regularly, checking fences and water sources more out of habit than necessity. They remained active members of the Laredo community, attending church and social events, maintaining friendships that stretched back decades. One afternoon, when they were both in their early 70s, they rode together to the spot where they had first kissed by the creek all those years ago. The landscape had not changed much, the same water flowing over the same rocks, the same prairie grasses waving in the wind. You remember that day? Teresa asked as they sat on the bank, their hands intertwined. I remember every moment of it, Xavier replied. I remember how nervous I was asking you to marry me, how terrified that you might say no. There was never any chance of that, Teresa assured him. I knew by then that you were the only man I would ever love, and I knew you were the only woman I would ever want. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow past, listening to the sounds of nature around them. This land had been their home for over 40 years, had witnessed their love story from beginning to wherever it would end. Teresa felt profound gratitude for every moment, every memory, every day they had been given together. Xavier squeezed her hand gently. "Teresa, when my time comes, I want you to know that you made my life worth living. Every moment with you was a gift." "Do not talk of endings," Teresa protested. "We have years left yet." "Perhaps," Xavier allowed, "but I still wanted you to know, just in case." As it happened, they did have more years together. Years of watching great-grandchildren grow, of celebrating new marriages and new births, of enjoying the fruits of the life they had built. Years of sunsets watched from the porch, of hands held in the darkness, of quiet conversations that needed no words. When Xavier was 76 and Teresa 73, he finally admitted that his heart was giving him trouble. The doctor confirmed what they had both feared, that Xavier's time was growing short. The news devastated Teresa, but Xavier faced it with characteristic calm. "I have had a good life," he told her as they sat together in their small house. "Longer and happier than I ever expected. No man could ask for more." "I am not ready to lose you," Teresa said through her tears. "I know, my love, but we have been blessed with so much time together. Let us be grateful for that rather than sorrowful about what is ending." Xavier's health declined slowly over the following months, but he remained mentally sharp until nearly the end. The family gathered, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the house with love and sorrow. Each of them took time to say goodbye, to express gratitude for the legacy Xavier was leaving behind. On a cool evening in November, with Teresa holding his hand and his children gathered around the bed, Xavier slipped peacefully away. His last words were for Teresa, a whispered "I love you" that she would treasure forever. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Texas. Xavier had touched so many lives over his 76 years, had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. They buried him on a hillside on the ranch, overlooking the land he had worked and loved. Teresa stood at the graveside, accepting condolences from the long line of mourners, and she felt both empty and full simultaneously. Empty because half her heart had been buried with Xavier, full because of all the memories and love they had shared. The weeks after the funeral were the hardest of Teresa's life, harder even than when her parents had died. At least then, she had been young, with the future stretching before her. Now she was old, and the future felt empty without Xavier in it. But her family surrounded her with love and care, refusing to let her sink into despair. Jacob moved her into the main ranch house, insisting she should not be alone. Emma visited regularly, bringing great-grandchildren who needed Teresa's attention and stories. Slowly, Teresa found her way back to something resembling peace. She would never stop missing Xavier, would never stop feeling the ache of his absence, but she learned to live with it. She found comfort in memories, in the knowledge that they had been granted over 50 years together, in the family and legacy they had created. Teresa lived for 5 more years after Xavier's death, years filled with watching great-great-grandchildren be born, with family gatherings and quiet moments. She remained mentally sharp until the end, still able to tell the story of the muddy bonnet and the kind cowboy to anyone who would listen. On her deathbed, surrounded by children and grandchildren and more descendants than she could count, Teresa smiled. "I am going to see him again," she whispered. "My Xavier. After all these years apart, I will finally hold his hand again." "Tell us the story, Grandma," one of the great-grandchildren begged, "about how you and Grandpa met." So Teresa told it one last time, her voice weak but her memory clear. She told about the wind snatching her bonnet, about a tall cowboy climbing into the mud to retrieve it, about gentle hands cleaning the fabric and tying it carefully beneath her chin. She told about falling in love and building a life, about children and grandchildren and joy beyond measure. "It all started with kindness," she said at the end. "With someone choosing to help a stranger. Remember that, all of you. Small acts of kindness can change the whole world." Teresa died peacefully in her sleep that night, and they buried her beside Xavier on the hillside overlooking the ranch. The entire community mourned, remembering a woman who had taught their children, who had built a legacy of love and family that would endure for generations. The Brennan spread continued to prosper under Jacob's leadership, and eventually under his children's leadership. The blue bonnet that had started everything was preserved carefully, passed down through generations as a treasured family heirloom. Each generation heard the story of how Teresa and Xavier had met, how love had grown from a simple act of kindness. Years turned into decades, and the original ranch house became a family museum of sorts, preserving the history of the couple who had built an empire on love and hard work. The main bedroom still held the trunk where Xavier had once stored that muddy bonnet, along with photographs and mementos from their long life together. The hillside where Teresa and Xavier were buried became a family gathering place, where descendants would come to remember and celebrate the couple who had started it all. Their headstones stood side by side, simple granite markers that bore their names and the years they had lived. But beneath those dates was an inscription chosen by their children, words that captured the essence of their love story. "Here lie Teresa and Xavier Brennan. Their love began with a bonnet in the mud and lasted beyond death. They built a legacy of kindness, family, and devotion that will endure forever." And it did endure. Through the turn of the century and into the 1900s, through world wars and economic changes, through droughts and floods and everything else that Texas could throw at it, the Brennan family remained strong. They stayed on the land, raising cattle and horses, maintaining the values that Teresa and Xavier had instilled in them. Every June, on the anniversary of when Teresa's bonnet had blown into the mud, the family would gather for a celebration. They would tell the story again, keeping it alive for new generations, reminding everyone of the simple truth that had sustained Teresa and Xavier through 53 years of marriage. That love built on kindness, respect, and daily choosing each other would last forever. The blue bonnet itself eventually became too fragile to handle, but it was carefully preserved under glass, displayed in the family museum so that all could see the artifact that had started everything. Children would press their noses to the glass, imagining that long-ago day when wind and fate and a kind cowboy had combined to create a love story for the ages. And in the quiet moments, when descendants stood on that hillside overlooking the ranch, they swore they could feel the presence of Teresa and Xavier still watching over the land and family they had created. It was a comforting thought, the idea that love that strong could somehow transcend death, that two souls who had been so perfectly matched in life might still be together somehow. The story of Teresa and Xavier became more than just family history. It became legend, told and retold throughout South Texas, an example of what real love looked like. It was a reminder that the best things in life often come from unexpected moments, from choosing kindness when it would be easier to walk past, from taking care with small things like muddy bonnets and ribbon ties. Their love had been simple in many ways, built on daily acts of care and consideration rather than grand gestures. But that simplicity was what made it strong, what allowed it to endure through decades of ordinary days and extraordinary challenges. They had chosen each other every single day, through sickness and health, prosperity and hardship, youth and old age. And it all started with a cowboy who saw a woman in distress and chose to help, who cleaned a muddy bonnet with care and tied it gently beneath her chin, who looked into blue eyes and saw his future. It started with a teacher who recognized kindness when she saw it, who took a chance on a stranger, who built a life based on love rather than practicality. The wind that had snatched Teresa's bonnet that hot June day in 1877 had been random chance, but everything that followed was choice. Two people choosing to see the best in each other, to build something together, to honor their commitment through whatever came. That was the real story, the real legacy that Teresa and Xavier left behind. And so the Brennan spread continued, generation after generation, always remembering the couple who started it all. The land that Xavier had purchased with his savings, that he and Teresa had built into a thriving ranch, remained in the family, passed down to children who understood its value, went far beyond mere property. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the sun was setting over the Texas prairie, Brennan descendants would sometimes sit on their porches and imagine what it must have been like. That first meeting, that first moment when Xavier tied Teresa's bonnet and their eyes met. The courtship and wedding, the early struggles and eventual prosperity, the children and grandchildren, and the simple joy of building a life together. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, but also more universal than that. At its heart, it was simply the story of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment, who recognized something special, and who had the courage and commitment to nurture that spark into a flame that would burn for over 50 years. Teresa and Xavier's story proved that real love exists, that it can last, that it is worth fighting for and choosing every single day. Their legacy was not just in the land they acquired or the family they raised, but in the example they set of what marriage and partnership should look like. And it all started with a muddy bonnet, a kind cowboy, and a ribbon tied with gentle care beneath a woman's chin on a hot day in Laredo, Texas, in June of 1877. From that simple beginning came everything else, a love story that would echo through generations, reminding all who heard it that the best things in life often start with the smallest acts of kindness and care. The end.